Welcome to Goldfish on Games, where today we're looking at a studio that for a short while would raid the world. But they started out on the Amiga, first as just a developer, but they went on to become a publisher, and in roughly 7 years managed to put out 35 games. So let's check out the games developed and published by Core Design. And our journey starts in 1989 for this Derby-based company that was started by Jeremy Heath Smith and a number of developers from Gremlin Graphics, and they hit the ground running with an impressive 6 titles. Action Fighter. This is a conversion of a Sega arcade game and was published by Firebird, an interesting start to the company that would be known for their own titles. Here you have to travel up the screen shooting at the traffic that gets in your way, while avoiding crashing into the sides of the road, while also upgrading and replacing your vehicle to progress further. Now this is not a direct port of the arcade game, this is more based on the Master System version, which is great in its own right, even if it is quite different from the source material. The Amiga version moves nicely enough, even if there is a bit of slowdown on some of the later levels. Now you can upgrade your weapons if you spot the Sega lorry, and you'll actually find more here than in other versions. Now it might not be as iconic here as it is on the SMS, but it is a great start from the company. Axel's Magic Hammer. It starts with a title screen that looks like it could be more at home on the C64, so we are seeing a company that's still getting to grips with the 16 bits. The game itself though is a platformer, but even in these early days we get to see some of that core style and design coming through, as this isn't your typical Euro platformer. It's very obviously taken inspiration from the Mario games, but it's not done the movement quite as well, as the jumping is a little clunky to say the least. Now you need to be holding in the direction you want to move in when you trigger the jump. Trying to move afterwards does nothing. And the hammer range, well, it also starts off a little short, but you will find items to improve that, with you quickly getting the ability to throw them. And there's even some other bonuses along the way. There are 8 decently sized levels with varying degrees of bosses to deal with as well. There's even a map. Dynamite Ducks. Core gets their second Sega arcade port to handle, but this time it was published by Activision. And it seems they can't help but constantly jump genre, as this time it's a belt-scrolling beat-em-up, where our 2 boxing-gloved wearing ducks have to beat up various animals to save their owner, that mysteriously was captured, and it's all a bit weird. But the end result is a reasonable game, if not all that quick to move around, but it is nice enough. It even supports 2 players, which is better than some conversions of the game. Now you have the option to charge up a punch by holding down the fire button, but this does mean that you're going to need to have access to the keyboard to jump, as that is on the spacebar. Now there are some cool items to find and weapons that will help you even out the odds, ranging from simple stones all the way up to rocket launchers and flamethrowers. This version also sports some special graphics, if you know those cheat codes. I do wonder if this helped create rumours in some of their later games. Rick Dangerous. Now this was their first real breakout hit, and it was published by Firebird. Now this is a game that went to hit just about every home micro at the time, and you knew it was going to be great from that iconic intro, where you're running away from the boulder to get that scream when it hits you or the enemy. Now this is a game designed around fast reflexes, or really trial and error. So much trial and error, as there are screens where you'll have no idea where the trap is going to be, but it helps that it's all presented in this lovely cartoony graphical style, and you do have lots of tools to help you out, like the gun that can take out baddies at a distance, or even trigger some of the traps. You have the dynamite that's used to clear the way, but obviously both had to be limited. But there's no getting away from the fact that its difficulty can put off a lot of people, as this game can be extremely unfair. Saint and Grievesy. Quite an odd one here, as it's technically a conversion, but not of an arcade or console game. This is a version of the board game, which itself was based on a TV show by the same name, that was hosted by Ian St. John and Jimmy Greaves. Or at least that's what I've read. I'm no expert on football or football shows, which makes trying to play a quiz game for said sport more than just a little bit difficult. Now this does seem decent enough. It's got some cheery intro music with some animated touches throughout. And the lines of commentary in that top box when you answer a question is quite cool, so you can tell it's a core design game. But this is one for the real football expert, and to make it harder, the expert on football from around the late 80s, which makes this at this point really niche. Switchblade. Core are back doing their own thing, even if it is still for Gremlin, in this interesting platform game that continues Core's idea of not following European styles, as they made something a little bit different here, even if it's not readily obvious from the start, as the levels are massive, but they do go on to feel very claustrophobic, particularly when you make it inside, as they slowly reveal themselves as you move along, as you can only see areas of the map that you've already visited. It's a bit of a cross between scrolling and flip screen, and it's the combination of the two that makes this really interesting, as there's 5 levels to explore with nooks and crannies for you to try and check out. Even the combat system is a little bit different, with you having a charge up mechanic for the kick. But if you make it far enough, you will find other weapons and upgrades. At little over a year old, Core entered the 90s, and they were not slowing down, as this was the year they started their publishing arm, and while it was only used for 2 titles, one of which they didn't even make, this was the start they needed. Corporation. This was the first game that Core published that was not developed by them, and might have been the very first game that they published at all, and this was made by Dementia. And in many ways, it's attempting to be a very early first-person shooter adventure, but with the limited resources of that original Amiga, and also not quite having a good idea of how this should be controlled. Now it might surprise you that this is far more complex than you might expect, as there's also a bit of an RPG system here for the various abilities, and you having lots of items that you can buy to help you out on your missions. And obviously this also means we have to have a damage model that shows how you can be hurt in the various areas of your body, and a system for selecting and using all those items. But there's no getting away from that control box at the bottom of the screen, as this lets you move around based on where you place that red crosshair, with sidestepping, rotating, moving forward and back, all being handled in this little square. It is an extremely detailed and in-depth game that even got a few expansions at the time. Impossible. This is a platformer that was released via Gremlin, but I guess that makes sense when this is a Gremlin property. Now, I wouldn't class this as core at their best, but it is still an interesting platformer. It does have that core trademark of having a very limited hit range for our main hero Monty Mole, and graphically it's fine if a little basic. But there are some nice touches, like the thunderclouds darkening the level when it attacks. But there's also upgrades that you can find, from the soup cans that increase your strength to the odd weapon that will last a limited amount of time. The levels are also quite large and actually have more to them than you might initially think, as you're able to go off the top of the screen and it will switch to other areas if you do that. It's a game where the music goes far harder than absolutely anything else in the title. It's
Monty Python's Flying Circus.
Yes, 17 years after the show ended, Virgin Games got the license and then gave it to Core to turn it into a title. And how and why is anyone's guess, as who thought trying to turn that surreal show into a game was a good idea? But they did try their best. And if you don't want your ears to bleed, do not enable the music on the option screen, as you'll get that one tinny version of the intro music on loop through the entire game. And it's a game where we play as Gumby, and we're gonna have to collect the 4 pieces of his brain that has decided to just run off. And how we do this is in a mostly shoot 'em up fashion. Now, there are bits where you'll walk around, but you'll quickly get turned into a fish and then get to fire more fish to take out the Python inspired enemies, all while trying to collect the spam. As for breakfast, it's there is the odd cutaway joke here and there, but at no point does it really feel like a Python game. But I do think that this was always going to be a difficult property to convert. Rick Dangerous 2. With how popular the original was, a sequel was inevitable, but this time it was published by Microstyle, a label of Micropose. And what is there to say about this game? Everything is bigger, better, and more dangerous than ever before. As we move on from Indiana Jones to Flash Gordon with a sci-fi setting. The pistol has now become a ray gun. The stick got a bit of a downgrade to being just a basic punch, but the dynamite has been packed into a new housing. One that also has a new trick, as you can now slide it across the ground. No more having to worry if you're close enough to damage something, or getting killed because you got just that little bit too close. Now, starting off, we are in an alien spaceship that has attacked Earth, but as we progress through the levels, we will head to alien planets, where we will take the fight to them, where we'll have to deal with more tricky and dangerous traps, with a few new ways of messing us about. And thankfully, those leaps of faith were cut down to a minimum. Skids. The developer keeps us guessing on what type of game they're going to make next, as we get something different here, as you start off having to select from a bike or a skateboard. Also, we can take part in the most extreme sport ever, litter collecting. As surprisingly for a core game, this is actually a bit of a collect 'em up, as we need to find the rubbish and then put them in the bin. with a 75% collection rate required for you to be able to finish the level. The controls though, they take a bit to get used to, as you tap the fire button to increase your speed and then you hold it down to lock in that speed. And then you have to push your bike or board around. It doesn't snap in the direction that you're pointing at. It's one of those games that I get what they were trying to do, even if it does not feel quite right, as they wanted to give the controls its own unique feeling. So it's less like walking around and more like skating or biking. Torvak the Warrior. Now this is the first core developed and published game, which makes it a major milestone. That also makes it a bit of a shame that it's not one that people really tend to remember, but in some ways it's understandable when the game is mostly an average hack and slash. Now our hero moves slowly, oh so very slowly, from left to right, swinging his huge axe that hits fast but then has a slow repeat rate, enough that it is a bit of a pain to try and attack those goblins. Oh, and it doesn't also swing down enough, so you can't really hit some of the crawlers, but they can hit you. And wow, the knockback is the fastest I've seen this character move. Well, that and jumping. He seems to be able to jump much quicker than he can walk. Now there are upgrades that you can find to make your weapon stronger, but if you make it far enough you can even find brand new ones. And with this being a fantasy setting, there also had to be magic that you can collect and use, and with 5 levels and lots of monsters and bosses to deal with, there is quite a lot here. It's now 1991, and when it comes to the Amiga, they're now 100% publishing their own games, and they continue to put out a few third-party titles along the way. But this is also the first year they really start work on the consoles. Carve Up. This is possibly the most arcade-style game from Core, more so than possibly their early arcade conversions, as this is their take on the City Connection style game, where we have to drive Carl, the cartoon car, around laying down dots or changing the colour of the various platforms. This is done for some convoluted reason, including some cartoon town and some big evil that's kidnapped all our best buddies and has turned the world quite grim, and I have to admit, part of me does wonder whether or not this started as some form of Roger Rabbit game, as I could totally see this being the taxi cab from that film. Either way, we have a fun little game, at least if you can grasp the controls, as you need to make both long and high jumps to make it to the various platforms. But it does have the nice touch that Carl won't drive off the edge of a platform when it hits the end. But be careful, even though there is plenty of power-ups, if you take too long, the Turbo Devil will make your life hell. Chuck Rock. This caveman platformer was easily Core's biggest hit to date, and not just for the computers, as this gave them their first real taste of the consoles, as it hit quite the range of machines. And I have to say that intro and title screen were absolutely amazing at the time. And this very much stuck to Core's gameplay principles, and tried to avoid the Euro platformer styles that everyone else was doing at the time, as the basic goal is just to make it to the end of the level, but you will need to use all your caveman abilities, like being able to pick up and throw rocks. They also have their impressive beer belly, even if that attack does have a bit of a limited range. The jump kick is much better. But don't think you can just land on an enemy, it's not that type of game. Now there's all sorts of dinos and other things that you'll have to deal with, or even use to progress through the level. All to try and get our wife back from the evil Gary Gritter. Good job they didn't have a child at least. Well, not yet. frenetic. Never a studio to stick to any one genre, they decided it was time to tackle the vertical shooter. But again, they didn't go with that typical European style. This feels more Japanese in its influences, as the enemy craft, for the most part, go down quite easy, even if we do still have quite the chunky ship to fly around. Now there are also upgrades, a decent amount if you're able to grab some at the start of each level. And then you can take down some of the more well-armoured enemies that contain some more, with obviously your attack power going down with every time you take a hit. And yes, it's also one-hit death. It's a fun game with a nicely done if short intro, which was something they were really starting to get a handle on. Now there are 8 levels that will take you across various backgrounds, all with their own baddies, and you also had some large bosses for you to take on. The first one is literally a moon. Heimdall. An 8th Day game that was another success story for the studio and the publisher. A beautifully drawn and animated title that sends you on a quest to find the hidden weapons of Asgard, as Loki has been up to his old tricks and is trying to kill the gods. And in an interesting twist for an RPG, you don't roll dice or anything that mundane to work out your stats. No, instead you play 3 mini-games that will determine your skills, and then you get to pick 5 other members for your party, which makes this more of a classic RPG, even if you gain direct control in this lovely looking isometric world. The combat though, it ends up being a bit of a timing game, where you want to try and time your attacks to get the best chance to hit your enemy. This is a bit more action RPG, but it's not quite in the direction that some games were heading in at the time, which makes this very much its own lovely looking, sounding and playing thing. An absolute classic. Thunderhawk AH-37M. Once again, Core likes to shake things up, as now they're taking on the action flight sim. Now it's not a genre at any point they were really known for, but they did put out a game with a moody intro and a decently playing 3D title. Now it's not the most detailed looking game, but that does help it keep it playable on the original hardware. Now there are a full set of missions to be getting on with, or you can just fly around and shoot at stuff, with there being lots of things to take on right away, and a decent range of weapons to be fighting with, from your standard guns to various missiles and bombs, all of which will be useful in the missions that you'll have to take on. Now this is a bit of a serious game from a studio more known for its cartoony titles, but they pulled off a decent game with some interesting but workable controls once you get used to them. Warzone. Another vertical shooter, but this time in the Commando vein, where you alone or a mate can take on a large number of forces. With at first a pretty basic pop gun, but there are boxes and upgrades that you can find along the way. That is, if you can keep them long enough to do so, as it doesn't take much for you to get hit and then that weapon will go flying. But manage to keep hold of them for long enough and you'll get a few of the upgrades under your ammo belt and things will become a little bit easier. Not easy, but just easier, as you'll have to deal with trains, tanks, heavily in place enemies with unlimited grenades and all sorts of other constantly respawning baddies. And because this was designed around a single button joystick and they didn't want you to use the keyboard, you can't just hold down the fire button to keep shooting. You have to keep tapping it, as otherwise you'll trigger one of your specials. As we continue into 1992, we find the company firing on all cylinders, with the Amiga being a major focus and primary platform. But they couldn't keep the previous pace, as they released just 5 games. But that doesn't mean they didn't put out some all-time classics. Curse of Enchantia. As a possible sign of things to come, this was co-developed on both the Amiga and PC at the same time, with the other computers being left behind. Now this is a point-and-click adventure that decided you don't need text to make any of this stuff work, as it has a fully icon-driven interface. Even when you talk to others, it's done via icons, and it actually does work reasonably well, while looking quite lovely on the original hardware. Although it is a bit of a shame they didn't release the 256 colour PC version for the AGA hardware later. The puzzles, for the most part, aren't too bad, because at least at the start it doesn't give you too much of a chance to get yourself too stuck, as the areas are relatively self-contained. But what areas you find, they are really inventive and quite unique. I always enjoyed the underwater part early on. It's nicely animated with a fun sense of humour, even if it is spread across a load of discs. Doodlebug Bug Bash 2. The only third-party game of the year, this was developed by Mutation Software, and it is another platformer, which is shaping up to be one of their main genres. But this one is far more in the typical Euro platformer vein than what Core themselves were known for, as it's very bright and colourful with a cutesy main character, and it is a bit of a technical masterclass for what the Amiga could do. But it did also take its gaming inspirations from stuff like Sonic. But it does have a few of its own tricks, with you being able to collect and use items that will be doodled onto the world to help you out. There are also some light puzzling going on, with some areas requiring you to collect coins to be able to pay off a loan shark. With 16 decently sized levels and 5 boss fights, on top of all that, there is enough to keep you going, and then throw into that mix some funky music, and you can forgive the slightly clunky controls. Jaguar XJ220. We finally hit one of the all-time classic racing games, one of the few on the Amiga that gave Lotus a race. And similar to that game, this is also based on a special Jaguar car. And not wanting to rest on just having a license, they managed to put together a great game, with a presentation level that is amazing, and once we get racing we find a championship style game here, where we need to not only work our way up through the pack to earn points, but we also need to earn cold hard cash, as that will be needed to make repairs on our supercar. It's a bit of a shame there isn't also an upgrade system, as I think that really would have boosted this even higher. But having to keep your car in tip-top shape is important, as well as having to pit to refuel, as you don't want to run out mid-race. This really shows what Core could do when they put their minds to it. Premiere. Another 8th day production and another wonderfully animated game. This time it's a proper platformer, but it sticks more closely with what Core tended to do than most Amiga developers. as it's more of a straightforward make your way to the exit type of game. But that's not to say it doesn't have its own ideas, and the big one is its use of 2 layers that our hero can jump between to make their way past various obstacles and venture deeper into the backlots, as we are on a journey to get back the missing film reels from the competing studio that nicked them. This will require us to travel around all the cliched film genres, from westerns to black and whites to space and horror. There are lots of inventive looking levels and baddies to deal with, as well as some decent puzzles. And each level also has its own form of ammo. Add into this when you have to go behind the sets as well, it just makes for a lovely game, and it's just so much fun to play. Wolfchild. A nicely animated intro and slightly convoluted story combined to make an interesting platformer, in which we play as both a man and a wolf man who has incredible psychic powers. That results in a platformer that you start off having to punch enemies off an airship, and it is really neat how the enemies go flying off the airship when you punch them. But when you manage to get your energies to full, you will transform into the Wolfchild and get the ability to use fireballs, which you can upgrade and get other abilities later on that really does beef up your power. But be careful, if you take too many hits, you'll revert back to your regular man-child. Now this is a stylish platformer that has you fighting across 5 levels, each being relatively unique and interesting, if not the longest you'll ever find. But you do have a great looking title with some nice ideas. We have sunny skies in 1993 as they continue to put out a number of Amiga exclusives, while also putting some serious time into those nasty consoles. But there's no denying the fact that the Amiga is important to them as they put out 6 games. Blastar. It's time for another shoot 'em up, but this isn't one that's similar to their previous games, as it's a top-down multi-directional one with a wrap-around world, so you can just keep flying in any direction. The default controls are quite interesting, as you use up and down to accelerate, but then you can just leave it alone and you'll stay at that desired speed. Now you will get goals for each mission, that might be, for example, to take out ground targets, all while you will be attacked from all sides by the enemies. Now there are upgrades to get and new weapons to find, and a decent number of large levels to explore and try and spend your money in, all while a great soundtrack plays to a great looking game with lots of weird and interesting effects going on. Not content with sticking to the regular genres, they had to try something completely different, as this is a real curiosity, as it's a bit of a platformer, bit of a puzzler and bit of a collect 'em up, but done in a 3D style, with you being able to bounce vertically between the layers. Now there are a few goals depending on the level. Now it might be you just need to find the required orbs, find the exit, or track down the baby blobettes and then guide them to the exit. It might not be enabled at first, meaning that you'll have to go searching for it, somewhere in the level. Now being such an odd perspective brings its own difficulties, with you both trying to see above and below you at the same time. The game does its best to give you an idea of what's around you, but it's not always easy, and death or just hurting yourself quite badly is extremely easy to do. Chuck Rock 2: Son of Chuck. In the 2 years since the events of the first game, the Rock family have had a baby, but the evil Gary Gritter has struck again, but this time going for both Chuck and Ophelia. And it's a good job he left the kid alone, as it's up to him to go and rescue them, in this charming platformer that looks absolutely lovely. From this village setting in the early levels all the way through to the coast, and even riding the back of a Diplodocus, all while being armed with a massive club. Everything here is wonderfully animated with lots of nice little touches, with the graphics changing as you progress from one level to the next. All while you also have this bottle that's on your screen that shows you how much health you've got. Now all those items, they're simply just for points, so don't worry, this is not a collect 'em up. But there is a number of set pieces that you'll find as you go along, like having to avoid the huge feet, or boss fights with the large limbs. Cyberpunks. The final Mutation Software developed game that Core published, and this one resulted in a multi-directional top-down shooter. But it's one where you control a trio of cyberpunks. This means you have 3 times the firepower, 3 times the amount of space to store items, but also 3 times the area to get hurt, as you have to deal with some very aliens-inspired, well, aliens and story, as this lot has infested and wiped out this colony, and it's up to us to clear them out in turn. And obviously it had to be against the clock, with a timer that's always ticking down through the entire lot. Now there are upgrades and items that you'll find along the way to help you out, but they will have to live in your inventory, so you might need to make a choice between holding on to a health restore or getting a key that is required. It's an interesting game with a lot of charm and customization options for how you use those 3 punks. Darkmere, the nightmare's begun. This was the only game from 0 Hour, who produced a very cadaver-looking game, from the isometric viewpoint to the art style around the sides, although it does a good job of indicating where you can leave the screens. But what they've also produced is a game that's extremely text-heavy, with the action button bringing up a menu with a lot of depth to it, as in, there's quite a few options once you start digging into it, which ends up covering the nicely detailed artwork, but it will thankfully get out the way when you start to attack the various monsters. That will require you to hold a direction while tapping the fire button so you can attack in various directions. But you'll also get to question people as you go along and find out more about the world, as you end up having to pick up everything you find, as you have no idea what you're going to need to solve the various puzzles that you'll come across. Wonder Dog. An odd one here, as this is a game that started life out on the Mega CD, before then being converted to the Amiga, and to get it done quickly, they took what they already had done for Chuck Rock 2, which we can sort of see as it's got a very similar styling going on, even if our doggy hero does move quite differently to the club dragon kid. He is much faster, with an ability to throw stars that do little damage but will eventually take out some of the enemies, that do like to try and swarm around you from the start, but they will only hurt you if you attack them first. Now as you go on, you'll find the wings that will let you float down the screen using your ears. And with 16 levels across all kinds of landscapes, there is a decent amount to explore here, with a number of abilities to try out and a few puzzles to solve along the way. It's a bouncy, colourful game that moves well, even if it's not all that original. Welcome to 1994, where for the most part things are mostly the same. The Amiga is still a large focus for the company, with the newer hardware finally getting a chance to shine. And from the number of games that they were still releasing, you wouldn't think there were any issues with the Amiga market, as they put out 5 titles. Banshee. This is Core's first AGA-only title. And while for the most part they didn't really do all that much with the updated Amiga, here they really show they can make that machine sing if they really wanted to, as we get one of the more impressive at the time looking vertical shooters, that went with quite the distinct looking steampunk aesthetic, with hints of 1942 thrown in there when it comes to the gameplay. Now the upgrade system is mostly standard, with you picking up tiles that can increase your firepower, but you can shoot at them to try and switch them to something a bit more useful to you at the time. That might give you angled or side attacks, or even a homing missile to a bomb that you can drop. But you have to be careful, as death does reduce these right back down. That is, unless you've collected the build-up icons. Get all 3 and that will protect you from leveling down. The super can be a little underwhelming, as it's this loop-de-loop, and it only does damage to what you're touching while doing it, but it can be handy in a pinch, as you will have to deal with attacks from all directions and in varying sizes. Bubba and Sticks. Core returns to one of its best genres, the platformer, but this is with a twist, as it's more of a platform puzzler, as our hillbilly Bubba just got abducted, and with the help of his new alien friend Sticks, they have to try and avoid getting recaptured, and the multifunctional stick ends up being used as a club, a ledge, and even a gag prop, and becomes the main way that we will solve puzzles, as we have to attempt to make our way to the exit, across 5 levels of varying sizes. Now don't let the first one fool you, the second level is absolutely huge and will take you a long time to complete, all while you control a wonderfully animated main character in this well-drawn world, with some bouncy music and sound effects that are playing. It's a game that just oozes charm and humour, and even got a really fun animated intro on the CD32. Dragonstone. This is Core's attempt at making a more action RPG, in line with what the consoles were doing. And at least they learnt some lessons from Darkmere, as while it does have a menu to interact with the world, it has been simplified somewhat. And they even support 2 buttons, so you can attack with one and use the menu with the other. Now, as with these types of games, the basics are lots of combat and puzzle solving. That for the most part is just finding a right item and then giving it to the correct person. Now, combat can be a bit of a challenge at first, as you don't swing your sword all that quickly. So instead you need to learn to charge your attacks up and then release it at just the right moment. But even with that, you can be swarmed extremely easily. Now the game is split up into 11 large areas, and it's laid out more like a regular game than an open world, which does result in it being more of a linear design and progression based game. Now it is graphically decent looking, with a cool indicator for your health being the face on the HUD, but it is a shame it is a little bit small to spot. Heimdall 2 Into the Hall of Worlds. After 3 years, the 8th Day have returned to their first big title, and while it retains that 3D isometric look and that almost trademark style and animations, the gameplay has undergone a huge change, as it's now far more an action RPG than ever before. Gone is that combat window with you having to click attack. Now it's just you hitting the fire button, with you using your sword or bow depending on the distance to the enemy. And the number of heroes has also been dropped to just 2, Heimdall and Ursula, that you can easily switch between at any point. Now on top of all this, there's a brand new spell system that requires you to collect runes that you can then freely use to make up spells. Now scrolls will tell you the right combinations, and after a while you can even start to guess at what some of the more powerful ones will be later on. This is quite an interesting one, as it also got an AGA upgrade and some further work for the CD32. Universe. Core took the engine that powered Curse of Enchantica and decided to make a brand new game with it, this time with a sci-fi setting that is pushing quite a lot of colours even on a stock machine. This is all about a teen who, when messing around at their uncle's house, gets zapped across the universe and has to work their way back home. Now the control method is much the same as Curse, but they decided this time they really needed text, if just to describe what's going on in this otherworldly place. As you start off having to jump between these various asteroids, trying to find the bits and pieces that you'll need to be able to get you to the city. But eventually you will make it further into the game, where you'll have even more puzzles to solve. And in doing so you will encounter the conversation tree, which is also newly added. Now it seems that there was an AGA version in development based on the PC artwork, but that eventually got released in the form of the CD32 and the AGA version was dropped. Our Amiga story ends in 1995, and quite suddenly, as their once main market had shrunk to the point where it almost wasn't worth it anymore. And well, they had something a bit large coming out in the next year, but they did manage to put out a single title, and that was Skeleton Crew. Now this is another AGA only game, but this too also showed up on the CD32 and the Mega Drive. And it looked like they had planned a whole franchise around this, which never ended up materializing. Now what we get is an isometric shooter with a very distinct grimdark art style, with everything being made out of bones, having lots of K's in their name, and lots of blood everywhere. Now set across multiple unique levels, you have to shoot and blast your way through multiple mutants and bosses, and you'll have to work your way to the exit, all while having to get to grips with the controls, which they did provide quite a few variations on. So in theory you should find something that works for you. The action is fast, the game moves well, and it even supports 2-player co-op, which will be useful as this has arcade style difficulty going for it. And with that, we've seen every single core design game that they worked on or published for the Amiga. Now they did go on to do very big things, with them having for a short while one of the biggest franchises in all of gaming. And I always felt that that one was a bit of a spiritual successor to Rick Dangerous. Now do you have a favourite in all this lot? And is there any studio or publisher you'd like me to check out next? Let me know in the comments. Videos like this would not be possible without the help of my absolutely amazing Patreons, who not only got to see this video advert free and a whole week early, they are also on screen right now. And if you'd like to join them, as well as getting things like hints at future videos, as well as a peek inside the Goldfish Bowl, you can do so for free. There will be links in the description. And until next time, I was the Goldfish that was...
Bunga bunga!
And this was Goldfish on Games.